Welcome back to the deep dive. Our mission today,
Huh.
pretty simple. We want to give you a shortcut to, well, genuine fluency in financial decision making.
Mhm.
We've looked at a whole stack of sources that basically challenge this idea that money is all about math.
Right.
And we're going to distill the deep psychological stuff, the scaling errors, the things that make even smart people make, let's say, questionable choices.
Yeah.
So if you want a quick, thorough understanding of why your spreadsheets sometimes, fail you,
Yeah.
you're definitely in the right place.
And that very first belief that money should be purely rational, that's probably the first big stumble for most people.
Okay.
We treat finance like it's this clean, efficient equation, but what our sources are showing us is that it's actually messy, it's chaotic, and it's really driven by, well, human nature.
Huh.
So today, we're going to dissect three huge areas where emotion, scale, and some really deep-seated psychology just completely swamp the ledger book and, frankly, dictate our choices.
Okay, let's unpack this then. Let's jump right in with maybe the most relatable bit. That constant tension between the logical head and the, feeling heart when you're making big life choices.
Mm-hmm.
I was really struck by that story about the couple buying their first house. Apparently, they were known for being super rigorous financially, right?
Yeah.
And they go to see this property telling themselves, we're just gathering information, square footage, tax rates, all that logical stuff.
The checklist approach.
Exactly. But the second they pull up, the wife sees this big oak tree with a classic kid's tree swing. They had a baby son. And she just gasped, I love it. We have to buy it. Just like that.
Yeah.
The whole rational process just, poof, evaporated because emotion got involved and there was like nothing they could do about it.
And that story is so powerful because it's not some weird exception. That's basically the universal experience, isn't it, when the stakes are high financially? When you're buying a house, you're not just buying lumber and plaster. You're walking through and you're like literally picturing Christmas mornings,
Yeah.
future birthdays, family get-togethers, all the life that's going to happen there. No amount of cool, calm analysis can just strip that future vision out of the decision. It's impossible.
So it's baked in from the start.
Totally baked in. Jason Zweig, he shared a similar thing with his mom selling their longtime family home. She told him, look, I never actually liked the physical house itself, no real attachment to the structure. But, she said, everything important that ever happened in our life as a family, it's here.
Yeah.
And I can't just leave that behind, The spreadsheet says sell, the heart says stay.
And that right there, that's where the key analytical difference is so critical. Like if I ask you, how much are the memories of watching your kids grow up worth?
Priceless, obviously.
Right, priceless. You can't put a number on it.
Yeah.
But if I ask, okay, what's the fair market value of the house where you made those priceless memories?
Well, it's easy. I can get you that number.
Exactly. And that huge gap, the difference between the priceless value and the actual priced value,
Yeah.
that explains so much about why we maybe overspend on things we really cherish.
Precisely. And look, the core message here isn't just follow your heart and be reckless. Not at all.
Okay.
The idea is that the best decisions, they tend to happen at that intersection of head and heart. They should be driven, ideally, by equal parts rational math and genuine emotional joy.
So about balance.
A balance. The real problem comes when we try to view financial decisions only through that lens of what's purely rational, efficient, methodical. You can end up making choices that leave you feeling, well, emotionally bankrupt, even if your bank account looks okay on paper.
I love that framing. But okay, let me push back just a tiny bit. The source material uses that great Louis Armstrong analogy. If it sounds good, you don't worry what it is. Makes sense for music.
Mm-hmm.
But if the emotional subjective part is totally in control when you're valuing memories or, say, choosing a partner, doesn't that just fling the door wide open for completely reckless spending?
That's a fair point. But I think the analogy is more about defining value, not necessarily setting the budget. Your subjective side, your gut, it knows what you truly want, often better than any spreadsheet can calculate. So the logic maybe should be, let that emotional value drive the selection. Pick the house that feels like home. Choose the career that you find meaningful.
Got it.
But let the rational math set the boundary, the budget. Money actually gets easier, I think, when you stop seeing it purely as a math problem you have to solve and start seeing it more as an emotional need you have to fulfill, but within defined financial limits.
And it makes a lot more sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a handle on the mindset for those huge emotional decisions. But now we shift to the second big theme. And honestly, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Because our sources lay out two completely conflicting, but both seem totally valid, viewpoints on obsessing over small expenses.
Yeah, this is a fascinating paradox. We absolutely have to start with the historical case for extreme frugality, the idea that it yields massive returns, but specifically at scale. This shows why costs that seem tiny, insignificant even,
Right.
when they compound consistently, they can actually become the main event.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about President Calvin Coolidge. He was famous, maybe infamous, for focusing on tiny efficiencies.
Okay.
His team figured out that government letters cost, get this, 26 cents each to send out. Now, 26 cents, it's nothing, right?
Seems like nothing.
But back in 1925, the federal government had like 585,000 employees. If each one wrote just 5 letters a day, that tiny 26 cents balloons to over $197 million a year.
Wow.
Which back then was almost 7% of the entire federal budget. So Coolidge wasn't being an idiot obsessing over 26 cents. He understood the power of scale.
Okay, that's scale.
Uh-huh.
And then there's consistency, right? Which the John D. Rockefeller example nails even better. Reducing the solder used to seal an oil can from 40 drops down to 39 drops. I mean, it sounds completely absurd for the richest guy in the world to worry about 1 drop of solder.
It sounds absurd, but that 1 drop saved $2,500 in the first year. Peanuts for him, sure.
Right.
But as Standard Oil grew globally, that tiny, consistent change compounded into hundreds of thousands, eventually worth something like $20 million in today's money. The lesson isn't the 1 drop. It's the tiny, daily discipline creating the scale.
This really brings up that crucial distinction we need to unpack. Price versus cost. It's easy to mix them up.
Very easy.
Price is what you pay up front, right? The obvious number. But cost is that slow drip over time. The invisible stuff, easy to ignore. But as the sources show, it can completely swamp the big, obvious price tag.
Exactly.
Take that house example again. Bought for, say, $60,000 back in 1974. Today, it might be worth $350,000.
Looks good on paper.
Yeah, you run the simple math, it looks like a decent return, maybe 3.75% a year. Not bad.
But wait, now factor in the cost. Property taxes.
Yeah.
Easily 1% of the home's value every single year.
Okay.
Maintenance, upkeep the new roof, the furnace replacement, all that stuff that'll easily eat another 1 to 3% of the value annually, averaged out over decades. So when you actually factor in those small, ongoing, often invisible costs, the long-term returns on that house, they suddenly look, as the source says, quite dim.
Wow.
The invisible costs basically wiped out a huge chunk of the apparent profit. That's why people can feel house rich but still be cash poor. The drip, drip, drip adds up.
That's staggering when you think about it that way. So this obsession with compounding small amounts, even if it feels painful sometimes, that's what really drives wealth accumulation.
It seems to be a key ingredient, especially early on.
Like Warren Buffett measuring expenses by their future compounded value. So a $100 suit isn't $100, it's potentially millions in lost future returns.
Right. Or Chris Davis's grandfather saying a $1 hot dog actually cost him $1,000 because of the lost compounding.
Okay, but doesn't that just make you utterly miserable, measuring a $30,000 haircut, like the example, or a $1,000 hot dog? Doesn't that kind of rigor just destroy the emotional joy we said was important earlier?
It definitely sounds exhausting, maybe even joyless, but that extreme focus, that rigor, often seems necessary in the initial phase of building significant, generational wealth.
The building phase.
Yeah. The takeaway isn't necessarily that you have to live like Scrooge forever. It's more that building long-term wealth seems to have less to do with one single brilliant investment and much, much more to do with thousands of small, consistent, sometimes boring decisions compounded over a very long time.
Yeah.
It's about developing a certain mindset.
Okay. Mindset developed. But now, let's bring in the other side. The equally persuasive argument that obsessing over the small stuff is actually a huge waste of time, a distraction. There's that great cynical line, save a little bit of money each month, and at the end of the year, you'll be surprised at how little you still have.
Right. And this brings us straight to Parkinson's law of triviality.
Okay, what's that?
It basically states that the amount of attention any problem gets is inversely proportional to its actual importance.
Huh. So we focus on the small stuff more.
Exactly. People spend the most time debating things they feel comfortable understanding, regardless of the financial impact. Parkinson used this funny example of a fictional finance committee.
Right.
They approve a $10 million nuclear reactor almost instantly because the number is just too abstract, too big for anyone to really grasp or argue with.
Okay.
Then they spend like 45 minutes debating the $400 employee bike shed because, hey, everyone's built something out of wood. They feel they can have an opinion.
Yeah, relatable.
But the proposal for $20 for employee coffee and cookies, that took up 2/3 of the entire meeting because everyone has strong opinions on coffee and cookies.
That is painfully accurate. And it leads right into the whole latte fallacy idea, right? Popularized by Ramit Sethi.
Exactly.
People torture themselves over the $3 question, can I afford this daily coffee, while completely ignoring the $30,000 questions.
Like what college to go to, what car to buy, how big a mortgage to take on.
Right. They focus on the $3 things because it makes them feel responsible, like they're doing something.
A sense of control.
Yeah. But that feeling lets them basically ignore the huge decisions that are actually sinking their budget.
Yeah.
The mental energy spent sweating the small stuff is way bigger than the few bucks saved.
And if you actually look at where most people's money goes, for the vast majority, it boils down to just 5 or 6 major categories.
Let me guess. Housing, transportation.
Yep. College, home, car, health insurance, maybe childcare if you have kids. Pretty much everything else, the coffees, the streaming services, the occasional takeout, that it often ends up being a rounding error in the grand scheme of things.
Wow.
So spending all your willpower on that rounding error while you ignore the interest rate on your mortgage, well, that's a recipe for staying stuck.
So what does this all mean then? We've got these two perfectly good arguments basically saying opposite things. And like the source says, the opposite of a good idea can also be a good idea. Do we just pick one?
No, I think the synthesis here is that you need both. It points towards needing a kind of barbell approach.
A barbell. How so?
Well, think of it like weights on either end of a bar. On one end, you have the absolute necessity of controlling your biggest expenses, the house, the car, the college debt. It's almost impossible to build real wealth if those are out of control. That's non-negotiable.
Okay, one side of the barbell.
Right. And on the other end, it's also really hard to significantly grow wealth over the long haul if you completely ignore the power of compounding on smaller, consistent decisions. You still need to care about saving, about avoiding wasteful small expenses over decades.
So manage the big rocks, but also don't let the sand leak out everywhere.
Exactly. It requires this kind of psychological flexibility to have that broad strategic focus on the big picture and the discipline for granular rigor when it comes to long-term habits. You need both ends of the barbell.
That ability to shift focus, that takes real self-awareness. Which actually brings us perfectly to our final theme, maybe the most psychological one.
Yeah.
The cycle of greed and fear.
Yes.
These two emotions, they drive so much in our financial lives, maybe all our lives. And yet, the sources suggest they come from the same place and lead us through this predictable, often destructive pattern.
It's a really insightful cycle, and yeah, it often starts quite innocently. Stage 1 is what you might call the innocent beginning. It's founded on this core belief: I deserve to be right.
Why? Because I worked hard.
Exactly. I put in the effort. I went to school. I did the research. Effort should equal reward. It feels fair, right?
Yeah, makes sense.
Then comes stage 2, greed and delusion. When you do get rewarded, when you succeed, it reinforces that belief. See, I was right. But that success, it invites delusion.
How so?
You start assuming, I did this specific thing, therefore that good outcome happened. You overestimate your own skill and underestimate the role of luck or just timing.
Right, confirmation bias.
Totally. And success tempts you to double down, right? Take twice the risk, have twice the appetite. Peak greed, the sources say, is basically expecting to get back more than you actually deserve based on the probabilities.
And once that success convinces you, you're basically infallible. Well, the strategy eventually stops working, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Which pushes us into stage 3, denial and stubbornness.
Yep. When things turn against you, when the market shifts or the strategy fails, you don't immediately question yourself. Instead, you interpret the loss as like a new opportunity. Oh, prices are lower, time to buy more. Or, the world is just testing me, giving me a chance to prove my conviction.
You're insulated by the memory of past wins.
Exactly. Success reduces your incentive to explore other ideas, to have what they call a beginner's mind, that openness to being wrong. You tell yourself you're being determined, disciplined.
But really, you're just being stubborn.
You're just being stubborn, refusing to adapt.
And that refusal, that inevitably forces the issue, leading to stage 4, victimhood and shame.
Right. After enough failures pile up, when the stubbornness clearly isn't working, you shift again. Now you see yourself as a victim. It's the system's fault, the market's fault, someone else's fault. Denial is actually at its peak here because admitting your error is just too painful. But then, when the mistakes become undeniable, when they force visible changes, you have to sell the house, get rid of the fancy car, that public demonstration of failure, well, embarrassment starts to replace denial.
That moment of forced public reckoning sounds brutal. That's the real cost, isn't it? When it's not just numbers on a screen anymore, but it impacts your actual life and how people see you.
It is brutal, and that embarrassment often accelerates the fall right into stage 5, fear and panic.
Okay.
Doubt just cascades. It becomes a doom loop. Your entire focus shifts not to recovery, but purely to damage control. Stop the bleeding, prevent any further loss.
And the mindset flips completely.
Completely. When you were greedy, you felt like you controlled 100% of the outcome. Now, in panic mode, you feel like there is nothing you can do that's in your control. You feel powerless. You might isolate yourself, avoid people you feel you've let down. And it's crucial to get this. Fear does the most damage when you're consumed by worrying about what else you should be afraid of, instead of just dealing with the current, maybe solvable problem right in front of you.
But eventually, the panic has to subside, right? The storm passes, which leads to stage 6, acceptance and return.
Yes, stabilization eventually happens. You survive, you maybe lick your wounds, and you vow, never again. I will never repeat that mistake.
You learn the lesson, hopefully.
You form a new worldview, seemingly smarter, definitely shaped by the raw pain of that failure. You feel confident again, but it's a different kind of confidence, a wiser confidence, you tell yourself.
Okay.
And what's the core of that new, wiser confidence? You tell yourself, okay, now I deserve to be right because I've learned this incredibly hard lesson.
Oh, no.
And that conviction, that feeling that now you've got it figured out, it brings you right back to stage 1, ready to believe you're infallible all over again, just with a different strategy.
Wow, it really is a cycle, fueled by our own confidence, ironically.
Seems that way.
Okay, that cycle is,
Yeah,
absolutely punishing to think about. So let's try to quickly summarize this deep dive for you listening. We've basically learned, 1, that money isn't just math. It's fundamentally an emotional problem we need to fulfill, but within clear boundaries. 2, that small expenses are, paradoxically, both profound at scale and need managing, but we also have to avoid letting them distract us from the handful of truly massive, life-defining expenses, that barbell idea.
Right.
And finally, that success itself carries the seeds of future failure, thanks to this relentless psychological cycle of greed and fear.
Yeah, the mindset you actually need is incredibly complex, isn't it? You need the emotional honesty for those big life choices, you need the analytical rigor for the small compounding costs, and you need that deep, rigorous self-awareness to try and avoid falling into those psychological traps, especially right at the moment you feel most confident, most sure you've got it all figured out.
That's the danger zone. So here's a final thought to leave you with, building on that. One of the core takeaways mentioned was that the pain people felt from fear was described as being 10 times stronger, 10 times harder than the joy they got from greed.
Interesting.
So if pain really is the strongest teacher, why does this cycle seem so inevitable? Why does that belief that I deserve to be right lead us right back to the beginning almost every time? And maybe more importantly, what steps can you take starting now to consciously sustain more of a beginner's mind? That humility, that willingness to admit you might be wrong even after you achieve some success.
That's a tough one.
Definitely